slightly different tack, which nevertheless speaks to the topic of the media landscape and its impact on these issues. So, you know, I was looking at the topic of access, this phrase, access to information. And it echoes, you know, the notion of internet freedom. And what I want to say is that while I think it's a really excellent starting point, I think we may have to revisit it. In some senses, of course, we need to start with making sure that citizens are able to access the information that they need. But it's kind of passive. And I think there are new developments which we need to take into account, which actually, which need building into these concepts. When we talk access to information, we talk about transparent government, we talk about resistance to censorship, we talk about a free regulatory environment, all of these kinds of things. And what that doesn't take into account is the active misuse that we find of information and technical tools in order to confuse, right? There are new threats. I mean, if we rather than talking about access to information, if we think about citizens' ability to use information to exercise their rights, to work on the SDGs, to do all these good things, then we've got to say to ourselves, it's not just about access, not just about opening a door, it's about dealing with threats that of people, of groups who are walking through that very door, but using it for bad, for ill, right? So let me just cite one or two examples, and we can, you know, if you like, we can take that further in the discussion. We live in an age of fake news. We have a president of probably the most powerful country in the world who has simply declared himself the arbiter of what is true and what is not, to such an extent that American journalists are scrambling to run ticker tapes underneath TV reports saying, hi, this is actually untrue, we've proved this several times, and it just doesn't matter, you know. We've had similar kinds of things emerging in the Kenyan election, we're closer to home, where doctored videotape was put out there precisely in order to confuse. That is using internet freedom, but it is using it in a way that is really harmful and difficult. Closer to home in South Africa, we've had the whole saga of Bell Pottinger, and I mean, I'm not sure exactly how many of you are from South Africans and how many of you are from elsewhere, but I'm guessing most of you will be aware of the way in which a British PR company got weighed into South Africa's public discourse, and specifically and in a directed and systematic way injected false content into the public discourse in order to further political ends. Channels, the technical opportunities that people have in order to fight wars. Now, what does that say to the way in which the media should operate and the way in which journalists should do their job? It seems to me that there are real difficult questions to ask that we need to address. The third thing that I want to mention in this context is that what we're seeing in several countries is the state's misuse of its regulatory and its economic power in a sneaky way to make sure that there are friendly voices on the media landscape. We've seen that in Zimbabwe, where early kind of licensing of commercial radio stations have consistently gone to friends of the government. The Angolan trajectory from some years ago, that's what's been happening, where friends of the government have been given access to licensing, to media platforms, and unfriendly voices have had action taken against them. And I think we've seen that in South Africa. We've seen that with the kind of use of state advertising money to support media platforms that are seen as friendly to the government. And I mean, I think this is a point where we have a discussion around community media. Because much as Professor Musi talks about, the state's role through the NDDA and so on, and I think in principle that's a very good thing, but we have to be alive to the fact that state money is being used in the community media space in a way that undermines community media's ability to be independent and truly serve the communities where they're situated. And I think that that's quite a deliberate thing. A couple of years ago, a station at Sasolburg was burnt down because it wasn't playing the game. And what we've seen is its revival, but with state money and state support, all good stuff, but in a way where it is now quite tame, I think. It's a complicated matter, and I don't want to suggest that it's a black and white, simple set of circumstances. But nevertheless, what I'm saying is that the use of state resources, advertising budgets, municipal premises, these kinds of things are also a way which impact on citizens' access to information. So where does that leave us? I mean, I think that the key to thinking about this is really by thinking about it in terms of public trust. I mean, I said earlier on that for me the more useful attitude, the more useful starting point is to say, do our citizens have and can they use the information that they need to exercise their rights? Now, part of the answer to that must be this concept of trust. You need to be able to trust the information that you're getting. And there, where we're talking about this weaponization of information, where we're talking about fake news, where we're talking about leaks, these kinds of things, it